to share this with colleagues. First of all, a very warm welcome. My name's Lisa Hopkins to the non-BEIA members. I'm the Chief Executive of BEIA, and I'm thrilled that we have today a broad collaboration and audience from not just the business events sector, but also from NZEA members and Evans members. You are all very, very welcome. We're thrilled to have you here. This is a really important subject, having just recently, as Adam knows, having just recently been on the other side of witnessing what we're going to be talking about today. It was a very close range, but we felt this was a very important topic that we should be discussing amongst all of us who work within the events sector. Irrespective of whether it's major community venues or indeed the business events industry. We're thrilled to have two amazing speakers who probably need very little introduction to many of you, but delighted to have Adam Lynch here from Reliance Risk. Adam, thank you so much. You're such a constant friend to certainly BEIA, but to everybody, and the work that you do is so important. And Andy Gollings. Andy, thank you so much for joining us from Red Badge. We're thrilled to have you here today. Your personal experience and your knowledge of our sector and the work that your team does, which can often be very, very challenging and very trying, but again, hugely respected. So thank you both for being here. As I said, the session is being recorded. There is an opportunity to ask questions, and we just ask if you wouldn't mind just popping those into the chat, and Adam and Andy will answer those as they go through. But in the meantime, as more people join us, Adam, I'll hand over to you to kick us off. And just to remind you, you are on mute. Now you're not. Well done, you.
4 years in, hopefully we're finally learning how to use Zoom. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Before we kick off, we'll just do some quick introductions. So for those of you I don't know, Adam Lynch, Reliance Risk. So I've spent about 20 years in the major events, venues and festivals and tourism industry, both in the UK and here in New Zealand. I've been fortunate to manage a range of venues. I was Spark Arena up in Auckland, the portfolio of venues down in Wellington, and I was down in Christchurch as well, pre-earthquake when we had the stadium. And then most recently, we opened the Reliance Risk office here in New Zealand. My business partner Wayne, who many of you know, Wayne Middleton, he used to service a lot of business events and venues from Australia, and so it's great to have a dedicated New Zealand office here. Andy, if you want to do a quick introduction to yourself as well.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Kia ora, everyone. Andy Gollings. I'm a director of Red Badge Group. I've been with Red Badge Group for 22 years now. I started as a casual guard even before that. And I've worked, I guess, across most venues in New Zealand, managed to get some international experience by trying to be part of the likes of the Glastonbury festivals and large concerts in Australia to see how others do it. So particular fascination with the crowded places strategy, which we'll talk about later. And recently we've bought the business has purchased Risk Australasia, which is a training and risk advisory company. So I guess representing both of those because there's a lot that both of those elements can do to support your industry.
Cheers, Andy. So just quickly, what we're going to run through today. I just want to start off. We're just going to talk about taking things beyond the obvious risk, and some things that we should be covering, things that we see quite regularly missed in planning for events. So we're going to talk briefly about that. Talking about how we scan and identify for risks, and specifically as well in the some of the civil unrest stuff that we're going to go into a lot more detail afterwards. And then Andy and I are going to do a bit of a Q&A session. So we've prepared some questions. Andy is obviously a huge fount of knowledge of all things security, planning and response. So the second part of it, we will do more of a Q&A. And again, if you've got questions as we go and things that prompt you, please keep chucking them in the chats and we'll keep trying to build it into what we're talking about. Something I always talk about at the start of all my presentations is we recognize that one size never fits everyone. So whilst we try and give pointers and we try and give hints, we recognize that there is no such thing as a bespoke plan that will go across everything. So it's important that you take what we talk about and fit it into your operating context. We're pretty good at identifying the obvious things that go wrong. So most plans, most venues, most events that we see the paperwork for, they've got the obvious things covered. It's the earthquakes, volcanoes, if you're in those regions, tsunamis, medical events. A lot of events will have medical cover, or you'll have adequate first aid on site. We've seen over the last couple of years that weather, it plays a bigger and bigger part in what can go wrong. No longer can we guarantee those long, hot, dry summers that we've had in the past, and we've seen weather interrupt a lot of outdoor events, but also cause some havoc for facilities and venues and transport as well. There's a range of other scenarios or factors that we see less often in plans, but are having a bigger and bigger impact as well. That first one there, the airplane, we talk about loss of access to our key access gateways. So if you're bringing in speakers or your delegates for your event or your attendees are coming in from far and wide, if they can't access Auckland Airport or Wellington Airport or Christchurch Airport, then it makes getting those people to your venues outside of those gateway cities a lot harder, and something that needs to be planned for. Transport accidents. I know some of the people on this call were over in Australia at AIM when there was the bus crash. Whilst they're rare, they do happen and they can have quite a big impact. And having a plan around how to identify good transport operators and then monitor and respond to it is really important. Utility failures. We know that New Zealand suffers from some aging infrastructure. And even in newer infrastructure, newer facilities, sometimes the infrastructure within the buildings doesn't work all the time. So making sure that you are liaising with the venues and facilities you're using and actually ask them, what happens if the power goes out? What's your backup? What happens when the internet goes down and all of our international delegates can't access the Wi-Fi? What happens if water is switched off in your facility for a couple of hours and we can't do food and we can't do welfare facilities? These are all things that can have a major disruption on your event and really should be thought through ahead of time. Fire, we're pretty good at. The little person at the end there he's not actually dead. We talk about food. So not only food contamination within a venue, but I used to challenge when I was at Hobbiton, I used to challenge the team there. What would happen if a busload of 40 people off a cruise ship turned up and they'd all got a gastro bug? And you've suddenly got to house and give treatment and welfare to 40 people or 80 people or 100 people. Again, it's rare, but when it happens, it can have quite a big impact. So building these kind of things into your plans are really important. These bottom ones are what we're going to focus on, not the cyber one, but these are some of the areas we want to focus on in a lot more detail today. We see more and more in the news cyber attacks. So these might be ransomware. We see people stealing personal information. So again, if you've got systems where you're either ticketing or you're registering delegates and that information gets stolen, it gets ransomed back, you've got breaches of privacy. And the new privacy laws are a lot tighter now with notification to the Privacy Office and the Privacy Commission. So again, having a process where you're backing up your information, having a process where you've still got access to critical information, critical registration information becomes really important. There's still bomb scares going on. We see a lot of this overseas, and we've seen it in New Zealand over the recent years as well. There was it wasn't an event, but it was a big disruption for an organisation, Hamilton Council, a few years ago. Bomb threat was called in early in the morning. It disrupted, the building had to be closed, police had to be called in to work through floor by floor and check for it. So that next one with the hand is a denial of access. So when you have these kind of denial of access type incidents like they had in Hamilton, you can't let people into the building. You've got to communicate with all the people who are on the way. Do you have great communications with your delegates or with your attendees? Can you tell them not to come to the area for a period of time, or tell them the doors are going to be delayed for 2, 3, 4 hours whilst you can't get into the building? And then the last two are the real key ones. So the loud hailer, so this is talking about civil unrest, so protests. So people who want to be heard, people who've got a point to put across, they've got the loud hailer, they're there to make a noise, they're there to make some disruption, they're there to interact with your guests or your attendees. They want to be heard, but they're not there necessarily to cause criminal damage. If you look abroad, there's a group A22, and these are the ones that we're seeing in art galleries, splashing priceless paintings with orange paint, or gluing themselves to roads, blocking roads so that people can't drive on them, chaining themselves to buildings. So this is where we start getting into the criminal aspect of it, where they are taking some more drastic action. We saw it a couple of years ago when there's been a petroleum conference that's done a few centres, and a few venues are on here now. They'll remember this. It's in Wellington. I think the stadium had it. We had it at the arena. I think it went to New Plymouth. And these guys really set out to stop the event. So they're there stopping people getting in, stopping people getting out, stopping it being set up, and really actively trying to do all they can to disrupt it. So a lot more to think about now than a few years ago, a lot more to build into our planning. So how do we start to identify these? In a minute, we're going to talk in a lot more detail about the security aspect, but there's some simple things that you can do within your team, within your organizations, to start that horizon scanning, to start thinking about the kind of things that could pose a risk before you start planning how to manage the risk. Obviously, we always push a good risk assessment. If you're doing this well, then this should pick up a lot of the risks that are going to be associated with your event. And it may be you have a checklist, it may be that you're recycling old risk assessments, that you're adding to them when new things become obvious, or you're adding to your risk assessment when you're seeing colleagues or peers or other events being impacted. And it gives you that opportunity to keep reviewing what could go wrong and how you're going to fix it. A big one now is topics of controversy. We know certain events are being targeted by certain protest activities. So if you look in the news recently, the cruise industry is a big target of protest activity right across the country. The cruise conference a few months ago had a protest outside the building. We're seeing them at the ports. I know Andy and his team are dealing with them around the country. So if you have anything related to cruise in your event schedule, chances are it could be a target. Also looking at speakers. If we do an event and certain religious figures turn up, or certain politicians who are in the news a lot with their thoughts and comments about the world, if they turn up, chances are your event starts to be a target. A good way to start thinking about this is the obvious ones stand out, but thinking about previous events. So Googling the speakers, Googling the topics of your event, seeing if anything comes up when you Google protests and that person. Talking to other venues, we do it a lot when we're doing concert planning and stuff like that. We talk to venues that have had the event before. What have they experienced? What went wrong? What went well? What did they learn? So we can build that into our event plans. You've got your own network and your own team as well. We find a fountain of information comes from sitting down with your team or sitting down with a group of people and giving them the topics and the speakers. It's amazing what other people have picked up off social media or other people have heard from their own network. So tapping into those kind of networks, tapping into that knowledge to gather information to start building up a risk profile is a really useful way to do it. And obviously social media. If you start to know of some groups that might target you, follow them on social media or regularly look at their content. A lot of them will quite publicly state where they're going to do a protest or what they're targeting or what the flavor of the month is at the moment for them. And so by keeping an eye on some of those regular groups, it just keeps you ahead of the curve. It keeps you ahead of starting to plan, starting to identify what needs to be built into your risk assessment so you can start planning for those threats. So what we're going to do now is I've got some questions ready for Andy. And as I said, Andy has been around as long as I can remember in New Zealand, and has dealt with just about everything in that time. So we've got some questions we're going to put to him. I've got a couple of slides for some of the tools he's going to talk about. And then, as I said, if you've got questions, keep sticking in the chat and we'll keep building them in as well. So Andy, if you can come off mute, mate. The first question I'm really keen to delve into is, can you tell us a bit more about the New Zealand crowded places strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And a lot of stuff we'll talk about now, there's a lot of crossover from what you've spoken about already, and it's important. And I think what I talk about with the crowded places strategy is the tools that were developed in 2019 by the New Zealand government to help owners and operators of crowded places protect the lives of people working in, using, and visiting the crowded place. And a crowded place can be any space that large numbers of people easily access and predictably access. They can include entertainment venues, transport hubs, public transport, shopping centres, houses of worship, and civic spaces, as well as a number of other places that people gather. And the strategy, what's good about the strategy, what's useful about the strategy is that it includes a number of tools. It allows people to assess their vulnerabilities, understand how likely they are to be a target of any form of disruption, assess capabilities, identify gaps, provides, if you look at it a different way, it actually provides some good practice guidance in terms of what you should have in place. Always, it's just a relative scale appropriate to the risk. And on the website, there's also further resources regarding recognising threats and hostile reconnaissance. So we'll share a couple of links to these tools at the end of this. And I encourage everybody on the call to familiarise themselves with them and take a deeper dive and understand the strategy as well. But again, the tools is where I would start and apply them to every event. You got a slide about the self-assessment tool? Yeah, we're good.
There it is.
Thank you. So look, the self-assessment tool is where you start, and it's about how do you understand how you rate how symbolic the crowded place, the space that you're operating is. How large is the crowd that gathers at your location? How predictably do they gather, so to enable someone else to plan? What's the density of the crowd? What's the social significance of the location to New Zealand? How impactful would activity at this space, how impactful would that be to the wider New Zealand community? What would the economic impact on New Zealand of this event not happening, or the space being damaged in some way? And then what the next questions, the last two questions, are really around your own confidence in your planning. How well have you considered individuals or groups who could attract the attention of someone wishing to disrupt your crowded place? How confident are you in your planning to be able to prevent these things occurring? Or how confident are you in your planning to react to an attack or to a similar disruptive event? So as you can see, at least this assessment just starts you thinking around the right lines for whether it's attack of terror, whether it's a violent or aggressive behavior, or a disruptive event such as protest. And then the idea at the end of this, you end up with a score, and following the guidance, a score of under 30. You've got a relative confidence in how you're prepared. And anything beyond that, it's worth diving deeper into the tools available and potentially seeking the advice of a professional.
Andy, I know talking to some event organisers and maybe slightly anecdotally, there's a tendency sometimes to perhaps massage figures to sit under 30. What's the risk of not being honest with yourself and kind of giving you that ability to delve into the next step?
Well, it's like anything else, isn't it? When you've any other risk assessment, when you're looking at the hazards your people are about to face, if you downplay them, you prepare less well for them, and therefore the risk of harm is greater. So, and again, one thing I will add though is that this assessment can't be completed in silo. One person completing this assessment is going to have a much less valuable exercise. Because I'll start with, I guess, is that a deliberate thing to score it low, show others you've at least scored it somehow, and therefore you don't need to do much more? Or is it a naivety in terms of, I don't really know how to do this. I don't really know what whether I would score high or low. I think my place is quite significant because I love it here. But does that score? Where does that score comparative to other possible targets? So again, I think there needs to be more education in this space.
And you talked about that next step. Do you just want to talk about some of the deep dive questions? Because again, I think maybe there's some not fear, but reluctance to take that next step for fear of it being overly complex. But there's some, again, it's a set of questions that you kind of pose to yourself to dive deeper, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. And again, it flows quite nicely. There's the first one, again, we've shown it's really quite simple. The second, assessing your protective security, is you don't need to be a security expert to fill this out. It's basically just answering questions around, have you set clear expectations with your staff? Have you got reporting and escalation processes to manage information? Going through all the way through this, just ask simple questions, yes, no answers, and you'll kind of, going through this process, you'll understand whether you need to do more or whether you actually, whether you're in the right place. You'll identify the gaps for further development, or end with some confidence you've got a good plan.
So a threat's been identified, whether it be a topic of controversy or some other threat, or that scores, relatively high. What would you advise event organizers to consider when planning an event with some known security risks?
I guess it all starts with access. If you can keep the problem outside, then it's much less disrupting to the event. It's much easier to manage. And if you do need further support from whether it be from security or police, if you've still got the problem outside of your perimeter, you're in control. So the access to the site in advance of and for the duration of your event, how are you controlling that? And I've had experiences of noise-making devices being planted inside venues, days, weeks out from for events, and being activated in the middle of a significant speaking session. So again, the protection of your site well before you're holding the event is relatively important. And then you've got to consider how prepared are the people that will have an impact or will be impacted. So those that have a role to play, managing that key role of access control, how prepared are they? How prepared are your staff to deal with the potential aggressive behavior, or even just kind of I guess less aggressive than I'm probably trying to describe here, but how prepared are your staff to deal with a little bit of conflict? Because dealt with wrong can put staff at risk, can actually trigger, because what you're dealing with on the other side of this is another human. So the way that inquiries, the way that initial approaches are dealt with can have a real impact on how on the resulting action. So not assuming it's always going to go worse, probably starting with what are the people you're faced with actually trying to achieve, understanding that so that you can kind of plan your response appropriately. But again, if the staff aren't trained to deal with conflict, to be able to de-escalate situations or start with customer service, then there's the potential risk.
And I know we've heard of some clients who have been targets of protesters, that even outside of the event, the protesters actually went up to visit them in their office, demanding to speak to the CEO. Luckily, that person wasn't in the building, but for the staff that were confronted by someone coming into their workspace, what they thought was their quite safe space, and demanding to see someone was very confronting for them. So thinking about that, and also thinking about, we have staff on registration desk. We have non-security staff in most positions, if we're being honest. We have registration desks, we have meeters and greeters, it's all about customer service and stuff. What kind of how do we prepare those people? What can we give them? What tools can we give them? Or how do we get them confident to have to deal with that if they're suddenly put into that position?
Well, look, there is training. There's definitely training, and one of the things that was brought in 12 years ago, or just over, in our industry was conflict management de-escalation training, and it's mandatory for all fully licensed security officers now. And I saw that over the first couple of years, I saw it make us safer. So investing in your people, making sure they've got they've got a few tools to deal with at least a low level of conflict, to understand personal safety, how they can create space, how they can ensure that they've always got an exit route, how they can keep themselves calm in these situations so they can consider their options and keep them and their other workmates safe, is really important. So that training, and I think the better approach to it is to have a hell of a lot of role play. Big fan of role play, so that these skills are practiced and become relevant under a little bit of stress. It's just investing in your people.
That makes sense. So just thinking about, again, we talked about identifying a potential risk. How do you advise people to engage with a security firm? So there's a risk and it's possibly beyond your own event management sort of knowledge or capability. What does that next stage look like? How do we engage with security? What kind of questions should we be asking, and how do we progress that plan to delivery?
Well, I think the beautiful thing about the tools that we're just talking about is that this will show you where your gaps are. This will show you what you need to engage a professional to do. And the Crowd Places strategy doesn't start with every event needs security. And in fact, after Christchurch, I did a piece with NZEA, I recall, where we publicised the Australian strategy, which was really quite similar. And part of the reason for that was that we were all scared to run events at that point. We didn't think we could plan them for a higher level of risk, or afford the hazardous vehicle mitigation strategies that we all felt were suddenly required. So this strategy and the tools under it will help you understand, I guess, where are the gaps and what you are really looking for a security provider to support you in. When you're engaging a security provider, again, I think you're looking for somebody that can show you the experience they've had in similar situations, and seeking referees and talking to other venues or other event organizers around the people they've used that they trusted, and they were happy with the support they got. Because while it's not a highly valued industry, there's a little bit to this, and I think the planning and oversight and management of security workforce is a skill set you need to be looking for, as well as a company that invests in their people and ensure that you've actually got good people on the ground.
And then I guess the next level of engagement, and I think sometimes people are a bit nervous about this one, is what does engagement with the police look like? Who should be doing that? And again, what kind of support do you see from your side coming back from the police to support this kind of protest activity?
Oh, look, the earlier the better. But what I would do is make sure you've used these tools. So you've done your own self-assessment. You've looked at the level of planning you've got in place, and you looked at the risks that you feel are likely, and then communicate that to the police. That means that you can demonstrate that you're doing your part. But the earlier you can do that, the earlier you can put an event of concern on the police's radar, the more support you're likely to get, because they've only got so much resource, and if they they're invested in the success of New Zealand Inc. And prosperity, business events. That's all part of it, but they can't pull staff out of thin air. and they will want to see you play your part in protecting your crowded place. So starting with the tools I've described already will inform the conversation with police and ensure that they can plan the level of support that's appropriate. Now they won't come in and control access to your event. They won't come in and deal with the day-to-day, but they will provide the escalation support if there's a need for it based on criminal activity.
So in line with that, one of the issues we've seen in some recent event is that some protests, there's a plan in place, there's access control, but when you have some very determined people who are determined to get into a certain place, sometimes they do manage it. So with or without the police, if we encounter protesters breaching into a part of our event space, what do we do? How do we manage that?
Well, I think you've got to have a plan clearly for that escalation as well. But I think the consideration is what are you concerned about now? The swift and forceful removal of this offender is possibly going to cause you more issues than a more considered approach. Waiting for a moment when there is enough support, when you can deal with things quietly and effectively, might be more appropriate. They're looking for attention. They're looking for the ability to disrupt, but also for that disruption to be a well-known thing. So the more of a spectacle it becomes, the more they are achieving their objective. So that reputational risk needs to be considered as much as the actual physical risk.
There seems to be differing opinions or differing understandings of how much we can physically interact with people. So just thinking about, if we don't have security, what levels of rights we have as, event managers, and then what rights do security officers have if they're on site versus the police in terms of removing people.
Actually, you should ask that when you dive into the tools we talked about initially. There is a link to I think it's called the community page on the police website, which has got a little information about Trespass Act as well. So maybe we should include that in the follow-up.
Send that link, yeah.
Look, so basically everyone who is an owner or operator of a place has the ability to restrict entry or to ask people to leave, and that right or that authority can be delegated to others such as security or workers or whoever. And that means that when somebody is asked to leave and they refuse or neglect to leave, they're committing an offence called willful trespass. So at that time, a crime has been committed and it should be escalated to the police at that point. Under the Crimes Act, those same operators and those under the same authority have the right to use a level of force, provided they don't strike or do bodily harm to the person, to remove the person. But we've got to think about safety first. Yeah, and if you are expecting security to do that or your staff to do that, you've got a health and safety responsibility to ensure that they are trained and capable of doing those things. So all of that needs to be considered.
Is what's the view at the moment within security and response if you have both male and female protesters? Is it still the appropriate response that females manage females and males manage males?
A good auntie managing a male is always very handy, to be honest.
Yeah.
And look, I think it's horses for courses in the moment. Clearly, when there's time, that considered approach, what's the most appropriate. But again, for all the way through, we've got to manage the risk of harm and the reputational risk of the way you manage it going wrong.
And how that plays out, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to do what you can do to the best of your ability with the tools you've got at the time. If it is the most appropriate person to deal with this issue is a male, and the protester is a female, then so be it. But there's a lot more thought around the appropriateness of that.
Yeah, fair enough. Have you seen in the recent years an increase in protest activities taking on that more sort of forceful, whether it be chaining themselves to doors or breaching through into event spaces. Has there been an increase from your observations in New Zealand?
Obviously not yet involved in every one of them, but yeah, so I haven't got I guess the details. There seems to be a lot more escalation. And something I was attended a meeting around crowded places earlier in the week, and yeah, what the police are saying is that the protest activity is becoming more escalated into acts of violence. But that's the same. Yeah, I live in Onehunga, so obviously was my road was closed last night for that bus, the attack on the bus. New Zealand is becoming a more aggressive place, and again that needs to be considered, but also so does how do we respond to it. I trained bus drivers for a little while around de-escalation, and the reason was that the bus drivers weren't able in their own mind to accept that people hadn't paid. The bus company were like, let it go, it doesn't matter, just let them sit down and take where they need to go. It's only a couple of bucks. But the bus drivers are like, no, if I don't teach them, no one will, and putting themselves into conflict spaces. So once again, the way that these initial interactions with protesters are conducted is an important part, because it could be causing some of the escalation. But on the other hand, when there is that trespass or the criminal behaviour or the obstructing things like fire egresses, it's important to understand who's got the authority. Getting that authority delegated in writing is always good around trespass. Making sure you have got the right people to call if police aren't current on site, knowing how to get their support quickly. And things like obstructing fire access. There's different pieces of legislation which allow the fire service to interact a hell of a lot earlier than the police will, and to ensure that if they are handy or you've got a number and they will come and authorize the cutting of that chain, that there's actually a set of bolt cutters in the vicinity to ensure that can be enacted. But again, thinking about who's got the authority and how you can quickly contact them is an important step.
I know when we were, I think you and I both worked on this event, but where we had the rugby league and our dear friend Jolin's on this call in Rotorua, and the NRL, we were doing that research ahead of time and talking about the risk of protest. And one of the learnings from Australia was that people were gluing themselves to the goalposts. So I remember that morning of the event having to run out and make sure we had a stock of acetone on site to be able to pour it into between the hands and the post to remove them if they managed to breach. So
yeah,
you're right. Having that ahead of time is really important.
Oh, right, completely. And that's a good example of I think they got everywhere other than the post, didn't they, for that event? Anyway.
Yeah. It was, that last 5 minutes was intense.
But it's a good example of intelligence informing planning. So we had the resources on site, such as the acetone, but we also strategically placed staff to ensure that wasn't a target that could easily be achieved. So again, it's that intelligence informing planning, informing operations.
You talked about the trespass authority and getting something in writing. Is that quite a basic document? Is there a template? If people are doing greenfields or venues that haven't had to do that in the past to give that authority, is that quite an easy thing to get hold of?
Yeah, it is. I actually don't know if there's one that's publicly accessible anywhere, but I'm happy to share what we use with the association and a number of associations and make it available, absolutely. But again, I think that that link to the little bit of information around trespass, it doesn't include that template, but the information on the police website around trespass is probably the best I've seen, a really nicely simplified version.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I know I've worked on some events and some venues where the police have requested trespass authority. And do they require that then to trespass people from your venue?
Yeah, they do. And the way that it works is that if we're looking to remove somebody, we ask them to leave. They refuse or neglect to leave, and at that point they're committing the crime. And at that point, that's when the police are empowered to do something about it. So by giving them the authority of trespass, delegating that to them empowers them to act on your behalf a lot earlier.
And how long should we trespass people for? If I trespass someone today and having another event next week, can they come back in? Do I have to trespass them again?
That depends. You can, well, there's a myriad of people on the call, eh? So in terms of an event organizer, they wouldn't be looking to try and trespass someone from a venue unless they've had that conversation with the venue.
Yeah.
I know that most of the sporting grounds, thankfully, are starting to trespass for the 2 years, which is the maximum.
Okay.
But interestingly, and that's we're trying to find some form of deterrent, but it's horses for courses. I think the leave don't come back approach, the verbal trespassing, is an important tool because it escalates the issue to the point the police can support, or we could use security to manage situations. But if you're looking for more than that, it should be followed up by a formal trespass notice, which means you need to know who the offender is, and the police will support in that action if need be.
Cool. I see that we have some of our Australian friends on the line, and Shane Armstrong from 24/7 Securities has asked a really good question. So his question is, risk management and planning is very important, but how do you manage operations and communications on the day, and how do you document and communicate the issues as they happen or after they've happened?
So it was 24/7, was it?
Yeah.
So I guess you need some effective logging software of some sort. No, I think the evolution of events being run from the high risk events being run from the hip, event organizers running around madly, and security team leaders doing the same thing, has probably moved on. So having a level of stationary communicators at the very least, so that there can be, there's an incident room where information is brought back to, decisions are disseminated from, ideally with CCTV, but you kind of make the most of what you've got wherever you are. So, but again, having that stationary point so that all of your decisions and the reasons behind them can be recorded. Is really just good practice from a risk management perspective. Because again, if there was any kind of inquiry into what you've done, the basis behind those decisions and the timing is an important thing for you to demonstrate.
Yeah, I guess that's something we always teach clients as well, is that you might think in the moment you're going to remember why you made that decision or the information that was flowing around, but when that adrenaline wears off in the cold light of the day the next day, it's amazing how much of the detail you do forget. So
yeah, completely. And God
really
forbid that it's an evidentiary thing, but being able to prove that's what it was, that it was recorded at the time in the moment, is an important piece of I guess defense if it ever becomes necessary.
Yeah. Just got another question come through. So Lisa just mentioned business events have an advantage that attendees generally have to register. So it's an opportunity to check delegate lists before the event. In our experience, protesters aren't shy in announcing their attendance. Even if an organizer cancels their registration, they can still show up. Is this a trespass notice situation? Excuse me, and can this be sent prior to the event?
There's quite a bit in that question. In terms of, I'll go to the end. Yes, you can deny entry to someone for any reason, and if you need to warn them off, as in to follow the process to ensure that they, if they do come into the venue, they know they're not supposed to have done. So recording that as a trespass notice issued in advance is a good approach.
We can certainly.
We'll go back to when we talked about initially around managing your perimeter. When you've got the ability to have confidence in the people that are coming into your space, being able to validate them, accredit them, and that includes workforce. It includes staff. It includes catering staff. I know that we've been involved in a fairly high risk event where there was access. The year before we were involved, the access was gained through the catering the catering facility, and they came through in a white shirt and black pants, which is relatively simple to do. So when the risk is higher, making sure that you have got good confidence in all of the access points to your facility and ability to validate anyone that's gaining access is an important step.
We've seen it as well that determined protesters are actually joining workforces. So there's reports coming out of some of the port cities that they're joining the workforce for the cruise ambassadors, with the view of getting into sensitive areas. And we've seen it probably less so in New Zealand, but I know we've seen it in Australia, where they'll actually sign up as a catering staff member. So not just put the uniform on and sneak in, but legitimately be on site. So we quite often give advice again to those higher risk events is that make sure that your catering staff and your supply partners have a vetting process in place, and they're not just putting, don't just fill boots. Make sure that someone's worked a couple of shifts and is known to management if they're coming on site, so they're not first shift in and here to cause some chaos.
Absolutely, and you can almost guarantee that one of those incidents has concluded with the shit. I didn't think about that. I just needed workers. So making sure that as an event organizer, you are having those conversations with every stakeholder. This event is high risk. We are concerned about unauthorized access, which means be confident in your people. Make sure they understand there will be a delay. They will need to demonstrate that they'll need to pull ID out of their pocket at the door or whatever it is. But have confidence in your people, and don't let those stakeholders be part of the problem, if that makes sense.
I just want to reinforce as well a point that you touched on earlier. We're working on an event at the moment for next month, which has a high likelihood of protest. And one of the things we've done in a lot of detail with the leadership of that business is really identify how we expect protesters to be dealt with. And so as you touched on, we've sort of discussed what does a serious breach look like. So if they get into this part of the venue, then that's not such a big imposition to the event and they can be controlled here. But we don't expect them to be roughly removed. We expect the police to be called and the police to trespass and the police to lead them out. So having that discussion about your level of tolerance of a breach and then the appropriate actions, the last thing we want to do is see that event on the front page of the Herald or used as a case study by the protesters of, this industry doesn't like protests and is trying to silence them and stuff like that. So having that written plan and having that shared with stakeholders, be it the venue, be it the security provider, having that really clearly black and white and then followed through is super important when we come to that reputational piece.
Oh, mate, completely. And having a plan that's all encompassing is important, because that's documenting your thinking, and if that's developed collaboratively, it's documenting the thinking and shared kind of awareness of a number of different stakeholders. That next step of how you communicate that to everyone, those, I think a venue, one of my favorite venues talks about the pre-event meetings as a circle of trust meeting. Those information sharing prior to the event, probably at least a couple, and then when you get down to your workforce, making sure there's time and a plan to have comprehensive briefings so everybody understands what to do in the event of a number of the risks you've predicted happening at your event.
I'm conscious we're starting to get towards the top of the hour. If anyone's got any more questions, please either stick your hand up and you can ask them in person or stick them in the chat. Just to start rounding us off, Andy, is there anything else that you think that we haven't covered that event organisers need to start considering in this area?
Look, I think probably we've touched on most of it already, but it's become more aware of what good practice looks like. And again, there's some really good tools to start doing that. And I will share the trespass link with you as well, Adam, before we finish. Yep. Have a plan, engage professionals to develop it further if you need to do so, and ensure that you've got agreement early with the venue and event organisers and security so you can share your plan with the police, so they can understand how they can support you.
Awesome. Jasmine's just asked a question. Other than webinars or sessions like this one, where can we go for training and upskilling in this area beyond de-escalation strategies, or upskilling in regards to what risks, etc., to look for when planning?
That's really I can move into shameless promotion if you want. Look, we were lucky. We got the opportunity to purchase Risk Australasia earlier in the year. The team there, they're very good training facilitators. They understand both, from a personal safety perspective, violent aggressive behaviour, but also doing some work in the risk management space. I attended a one-day course that was held at BEIA with Nari Keller, who's one of our instructors, delivering the training. And again, good people, hadn't been exposed to security risk before, took a lot away from it. So again, there's opportunity through Risk to learn more.
And I guess as well, engaging a professional to help you develop your suite of, whether it be security risk assessment or general risk assessment. So at least you have a good set of checklists and information to go off when starting to identify the risks and starting to plan for them.
Yep.
And then engaging with the venues as well, making sure that you're getting their knowledge and stuff built into it.
Completely. And again, I've talked about the resources. Again, the Creative Places guidance you'll receive links to. It is a really good place to start when you go through to the third one, the security audit. Again, you don't need to be a security professional to open that document. Open it. You'll see the questions it asks and almost the suggestions that it makes. Consider them. It'll make you safer.
I guess one thing we've got to be conscious of is there is certain training out there that starts to talk about a lot of sort of behavioral identification and some really in-depth topics. It's being mindful that they're designed more for professionals, and it would be unfair to expect our $20-something an hour guards or frontline staff to go through some of that really intense training and have the pressure on them to identify those kind of threats and stuff. So again, if you're moving into that space, I'd say that's where you want to really be engaging with a security professional to help you with that, and not trying to take too much of that responsibility on yourself or on your team.
Yeah, completely. Don't overcomplicate it. If we can do the basics well, and you're confident that your staff can do the basics well, you'll be safer than we are currently.
Cool. Well, if there's no other questions coming through, I was going to hand back to Lisa. Go on then.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I've got a quick question for you both. Vetting is a really interesting one. I've always associated vetting across the board with, when you've got multiple political leaders in a room or something like that. I mean, it's been a while since we've had a big type of event like that in the country. Is vetting a common thing that a lot of people are doing now, or can they get access to the right resources to do full staff vetting?
I think it's becoming quite expensive as well.
Yeah.
I think there's a per person charge when you're going through it, and I know they've moved to only certain agencies and stuff can actually go through it. I know when you're doing police vetting for, say, school trips and stuff like that, then they're very strict now about who that goes through. And you might know more who you might approach to attempt some of that stuff.
I actually don't. But I guess what's kind of cool about New Zealand is that one degree of separation. We've got our own trusted circle. And they've got their own trusted circle. So I know for a fact that one of the high risk events that I was involved in a few years ago now, if delegates weren't known to 5 or 6 key people, they were lucky to even get access. So starting with that, but yeah, there are companies out there that can provide this service. There's a cost to it. But I think that, again, that trusted circle approach, because all you need to have is confidence in their intent today. Whether it's yeah, sorry, I'm getting myself lost, but I think the importance is that confidence. So are they known? Do you trust them to people that you trust?
And also, like if you're dealing with ministers and stuff, and the DPS are awesome to deal with, where we've got if the PM or the deputy PM's on site, and they have access to an incredible intelligence unit, and all my experiences with them have been when we've flagged stuff with them, they've mobilized their huge machine and have been hugely valuable in providing insight and confidentially sharing that. But similarly, if you've got ministers and we've done events after ministers have been in the press for whatever reason, and when you go to their staff, they'll often give you access to, if they're concerned, they'll help you access the government machine as well. So hit up the minister's offices if you're starting to get into that space.
Thank you so much to both of you for doing this today. I think this has been, I've written down a screed of notes, so please expect some emails coming through, and we'll get those links from you. We'll make sure we get that out to Elaine and Sally Ann at NZEA and Evans as well, so that we get it out to everybody. We purposely called this session about being in a democratic environment. We can't take that for granted. There is something kind of cool to be in an environment where protest is allowed, but there's that balance, isn't it? It's that line, and it's when that line gets crossed where people are at risk for their safety, or as you say, there's a reputational, a significant reputational risk, then things need to be really re-looked at, and action needs to be taken. But I've learned such a huge amount today. I'm sure everyone who's on this webinar have as well. Adam, Andy, can't thank you both enough for being here and for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. I'm sure everybody knows how to get hold of you both. And if they don't, then hey, just holler out to BEIA, NZEA or Evans, and we'll obviously connect you all. But to everyone who's been on this call as well, thank you so much for attending and for taking part in this amazing webinar. So we will be shutting the recording off now, and we will be sending that out momentarily. Thanks, everyone. Have an amazing day. Ka kite ana.